welcome to the Labor Force Podcast. Stories of the working class in a time of renewed labor militancy and awareness that capitalism is a rotten deal. I'm your host, Mike Strugan, proud member of New York State United Teachers. In this week's episode, we have to talk about Venezuela's intersection with labor. Then the Democratic Socialists in the New York State Legislature look to capitalize on Zohran Mamdani's big win, and we get a barista's own words about Starbucks and the ongoing historic strike. Later, Business Insider out with how to land a job in 2026. To tie in with that, we then finish with a question. What is a work ethic? With a new book out this month that asks that very question. All coming up on the Labor Force Podcast. All right, why does the labor movement have to take a stand against imperialism? Not as an abstract moral issue, but as a working class one. Because every time the U.S. government pours money into a war, militarism or intervention abroad, that cost comes crashing back onto workers. It shows up as budget cuts, underfunded schools, closed hospitals, and jobs that don't pay enough to live on. It doesn't matter whether you're on the receiving end of the bombs or watching your own community get hollowed out to fund them. One way or another, workers pay. And that's why imperialism isn't someone else's problem, it's ours. And this isn't just theory either. We're starting to see unions say this out loud. According to Left Voice, back in December, the Professional Staff Congress at CUNY passed a resolution opposing U.S. aggression against Venezuela. More than 100 delegates across 26 campuses voting to oppose any military intervention or coercive action. And just weeks later, UAW 4811, representing nearly 50,000 University of California workers, issued its own statement criticizing Trump's attacks on Venezuela, pointing out something basic but powerful. Every dollar spent on regime change is a dollar that could have gone to education. These statements didn't come out of nowhere. They're part of a broader anger that's been building in the U.S. working class, fueled by the pandemic, the Black Lives Matter movement, Trump's authoritarian overreach at home, the U.S.-backed genocide in Gaza, and now renewed attacks on Venezuela. People are connecting the dots. They're seeing that the same system squeezing them at work is the one funding endless war abroad. Think about the wars we've been dragged into over the years. Iraq, Afghanistan, and now U.S. weapons showing up in conflicts across the globe. But the dirty secret is, you don't have to live in a war zone to feel the damage. When trillions go to the military, that money doesn't disappear. It's pulled directly from the things working people rely on. That's why so many of us are working 2 jobs just to make rent, while politicians keep voting yes on defense budgets. And still, there are moments that give me hope, like when dock workers with the ILWU in Oakland refused to load a ship they believe was carrying weapons to Israel. That wasn't symbolic. That was working people using their power on the job to interrupt the machinery of war. That's labor acting like labor. So the question is, why isn't that the norm? Why do we still see so much hesitation from mainstream union leadership when it comes to opposing war and imperialism? Is it fear? Is it those cozy relationships with politicians? And what role do rank-and-file members play in pushing their unions to take bolder stands? Because almost every time we see real movement, it's coming from the bottom up. I mean, have we been too quick to just accept what's handed down from the top? Maybe that's a risk all of us need to take, asking the harder questions out loud, even when it gets uncomfortable. Now, if that's where we've come from, let's talk about where we could go. There are some really exciting currents out there right now. Like you've got the United Electrical Workers, who've been outspoken about solidarity with Palestine. Not only do they issue statements, but they're actually building relationships across borders, sharing strategies with Palestinian unions. If that's business as usual, I wish that was the new normal. And it's not just about passing a resolution or making a post online, though symbolism does matter. It's about actually educating the membership so people get how imperialism hits their own lives, not just folks overseas. And it's about building alliances so issues like housing, fair contracts, immigrant rights, that's all connected up with the fight against endless war and empire. No more splitting those struggles apart. Now, I can't miss this chance to share one of my favorite examples from labor history. This was the late 60s, Detroit, League of Revolutionary Black Workers. These were auto workers, overwhelmingly black, who flat out refused to work on military contracts during the Vietnam War. In other words, they drew a line, wouldn't do the boss's bidding if it meant fueling war, period. That took guts, and I really do believe there's a lesson there. We don't have to accept what's handed down. We can build a labor movement that's anti-imperialist at its core. Now, what doesn't get nearly enough coverage in the U.S.? The impact of sanctions on working people, especially in Venezuela. You might remember back in 2017 or 2018 when the Trump administration rolled out a new batch of economic sanctions targeting the Venezuelan government. The official story coming out of D.C. was all about restoring democracy and pressuring the Maduro regime to hold fair elections. You hear that language a lot: targeted measures, maximum pressure. But if you look a little closer, sanctions function as economic warfare. And like any war, they hit working people first and hardest. Central banking assets were blocked, oil exports collapsed, and the shock rippled through every sector of their economy. At the ground level, breadwinners were getting laid off left and right as entire industries, energy, public service, and others, shrank or shut down. And this part almost never gets talked about. Sanctions didn't just mess with household budgets, they directly crippled the labor movement. Collective bargaining became nearly impossible in whole sectors. When everyone's scrambling just to survive, organizing for better wages or conditions becomes a luxury people can't afford. That's why groups like the AFL-CIO and other labor organizations weren't buying the White House's justifications. Their argument was simple. These measures don't just kneecap so-called bad actors at the top, they crush the day-to-day lives of workers and make it nearly impossible for unions to function at all. In one statement, the AFL-CIO directly opposed U.S. actions that, in their words, hurt Venezuelan workers and undermine democratic rights, calling on the U.S. government to end the economic pressure and let Venezuelans determine their own future. And it wasn't just talk. There were outreach efforts with Venezuelan unions, coordinated campaigns to send supplies, and real attempts to build cross-border solidarity. It's not flashy, and it doesn't always make headlines, but it matters. So the question is whether U.S. labor is willing to treat sanctions the same way it treats war, as a working class issue. Because if we're serious about international solidarity, we can't draw a line between bombs and economic strangulation. Different tactics, same result. Workers pay. Meanwhile, let's go in a better direction. New York's 8 Democratic socialists in the state legislature are heading into the new session in Albany with one fewer member but possibly more clout than ever, energized by the recent election of former Assembly member Zohran Mamdani as New York City mayor and the national attention his victory has drawn. Mamdani's rise shocked political observers and thrust his affordability agenda into the spotlight, and his colleagues say they want to capitalize on the moment. State Senator Jabari Brisport said, "I can feel the whole movement locking in," and believes we are in a political moment where we can actually seize this opportunity and push really far on these fronts. The small group of Democratic Socialists of America aligned lawmakers is trying to advance proposals that include raising taxes on the state's highest earners and corporations to fund priorities like universal child care and free buses. For example, the Fair Share Act would add a 2% surcharge on people making over $1 million a year, which Assemblymember Para Sufrant Forrest estimates could raise about $4 billion annually. And she noted, "We have the bills, we have tax ideas." Their efforts have faced resistance, with Governor Kathy Hochul previously calling income tax hikes a non-starter, though she has signaled some openness to other tax increases. Both the lawmakers and Hochul support a universal child care program, a promise that was a key focus of Mamdani's mayoral campaign, and Hochul pledged to put our state on a pathway to universal child care. The socialists acknowledge the fight will be difficult, especially as Brisport said the need for child care is in the billions, and pointed out that federal subsidy freezes have worsened funding gaps. To build momentum, Mamdani's supporters plan grassroots organizing, including mobilizing hundreds if not thousands of New Yorkers to knock on the doors of thousands of other New Yorkers and get them to put pressure on their legislators and the governor to tax the rich for universal child care. Well, Mamdani's rise fits into a bigger, familiar story inside the Democratic Party, the ongoing tug-of-war between establishment moderates and a more progressive Democratic Socialist wing. A lot of voters clearly connect with its focus on affordability and inequality, but that same agenda also sparks resistance from business interests in more conservative corners of the party, of course. That's what makes this moment interesting. A relatively small group of lawmakers, without much formal power on paper, is trying to use a major electoral upset to change the terms of the debate in Albany, especially around issues like child care costs and economic inequality. Whether they can actually turn that energy into real policy will come down to negotiations, public pressure, and whether they can pull in more centrist Democrats. In other words, it's a real test of how far momentum on the left can go inside a complicated legislative system. Next, let's check in with the ongoing Starbucks strike. Here's barista Sabina Aguirre writing for MS Now as of January 2nd. Starbucks likes to call my $15.50 an hour job as a barista the best job in retail, but because nothing is guaranteed and our hours are constantly changing, I'm lucky if I can clock 30 hours a week. I cannot support myself like this long term, let alone build my savings. Similarly, my coworkers who rely on benefits are lucky if they meet the 20 hours a week threshold they need to qualify. All of our finances are on a knife's edge, but Starbucks tells us to be grateful. I was on strike for weeks this fall with up to 4,500 unionized baristas with Workers United on a nationwide ULP strike to demand Starbucks stop union busting and finalize a contract with the pay, hours, and protections we need to succeed. Our historic Red Cup Rebellion is now the longest ULP strike in Starbucks history. While some of us have returned to work, more than 1,000 baristas in 10 cities are still striking, and hundreds more might join them soon. My mornings start before the sun. My commute is usually peaceful. Few people are up, and the world is quiet. But the calm ends the minute I'm inside the doors at work. It's 5 o'clock, and the store needs to be set up and opened. The morning rush is full of friendly faces eager to get caffeinated, eat breakfast, and start their day. Everyone wearing an apron is constantly moving. The busyness doesn't bother me, but the understaffing does. It takes at least 4 people to make sure customers get their orders on time during that morning rush, but most mornings there's only 2 of us. My store hasn't been adequately staffed for as long as I can remember. One of us is taking orders, making food, teas, drip coffee, and talking with customers. The other is working through the never-ending stream of cafe and mobile orders. Some days it's just me handling it all. The line wraps through the building, and people are left waiting, if not fuming. My experience isn't unique. Between low wages and insufficient hours, many baristas are barely getting by. Some are relying on SNAP or Medicaid to help make ends meet, while a multi-billion-dollar company profits off our labor. More than 250 baristas have joined our union since our strike began in November, and another 300 just petitioned for a union election. At the same time baristas like me struggle, CEO Brian Nichol, who started at Starbucks in September 2024, took home at least $96 million in his first 4 months in the position, including a $5 million bonus and $90 million in stock awards. According to the AFL-CIO's Executive Pay Watch report, in those 4 months in 2024, he made 6,666 times what the average Starbucks employee made that year. That report points out that the median Starbucks barista would have had to work for Starbucks from 4643 BCE to the present to earn what Nichol earned in 2024. In 2025, Starbucks spent $81 million on a managers-only conference and party, allotted $6 million to executive bonuses, and posted a $360,000 job listing for a pilot. This after Starbucks promised Nichol he wouldn't have to move from his home in Newport Beach, California, but could commute the 1,000 miles to Seattle if he became the company's CEO. On top of that wasteful spending, Starbucks has spent $240 million on union busting since our organizing began in 2021. Starbucks could have spent that money finalizing a fair contract with baristas like me who make the company run but are living paycheck to paycheck. My coworkers and I never wanted it to get this far. We wanted a fair contract months ago. We want Starbucks to succeed. Our livelihoods depend on it. But real success can only happen when Starbucks ends the union busting and gives us, the people who make Starbucks run, the contract we deserve. And it bears repeating, they're still asking us to boycott. So under no circumstances, no money to this company until that contract is ratified. You don't need a frappe latte or whatever the hell bullshit overpriced drink. You know, there's been this classic image of white-collar work, right? Cubicles, coffee in the break room, stable Monday through Friday gigs with some perks on the side. But lately, it's like that whole world is getting an upgrade, or maybe a downgrade depending on how you look at it. Companies are moving fast to trim costs and crank up efficiency. That's the buzzword now. And we're seeing it everywhere from tech giants like Google and Amazon to just about any big office you can name. Take Google and Amazon, for example, just as a snapshot. They're walking back a lot of that pandemic flexibility, pushing for more folks to come back to the office, cutting back on work from home days, and even pulling the plug on some of those fun perks like gym stipends or fancy snacks in the break room. More than that, the requirements to even get an interview are tightening up. The screening calls are way more intense. Someone might work for a medium-sized tech company that before you could sort of show up, chat about your experiences, maybe flex some tech buzzwords, and that was enough. But now, you've got to practically come in with a project pitch and detailed data to back every bullet point on your resume. It's like the hiring bar jumped a few feet just overnight. It kind of pushes against that old promise of stable, reliable office work. Now nothing really feels guaranteed. Makes you wonder if the real job security, or at least the appearance of it, was just another perk getting cut in the name of efficiency. So basically, a lot of folks are finding the rules change mid-game, which brings us to how you even land one of these jobs in the first place now. So if you're still sending your resume into a job portal and praying for a call back, we hate to break it to you, but that's barely working anymore. Companies, recruiters, they're laser focused on internal referrals and networking. Everybody says it. It's who you know, not what you know. Recruiters are straight up telling candidates to customize the hell out of their resumes for each application, and especially to use LinkedIn to actually reach out to people inside the company, like hiring managers, not just submit through the big bland portals. But this is where I think it gets tricky. What if you don't have a network, or if you're just starting out, or you're switching fields, and your existing connections don't match where you want to go next? You could have someone who, instead of just applying online, started messaging alumni from his college, saying, look, I'm interested in joining this industry. Any advice? And maybe he gets a coffee chat that way, and then another one. And then all of a sudden he's got his resume in front of someone who actually makes hiring decisions. It's pretty wild. Definitely more legwork, but maybe more effective now. I'm not sure everyone's comfortable with that level of self-promotion, but at this point, it kind of beats being stuck in the resume black hole. So with all these new hoops, what are companies actually looking for? What's the golden ticket that gets you hired these days? There's been a real shift, almost a 180, in what employers are valuing, right? Now instead of obsessing just about your degree or ticking off years of experience, companies are putting way more weight on actual skills. And I mean not just technical chops, but stuff like problem solving or learning on the fly. Like Walmart's doing these huge training pipelines, and IBM's out there offering its own certifications. They're hunting for people who can pick up new tools quickly, adapt to curveballs, things like that. If you can show you're trainable and not locked into a single way of doing things, you're suddenly a much hotter ticket. Let's say a teacher like me decided to make the jump into tech. I might talk about how the whole credential thing used to be so intimidating, but now the companies I'm talking to care more about whether I can learn SQL or handle troubleshooting than what's written on my diploma. And that's kind of matching what I'm seeing nationally. More employers are dropping degree requirements altogether, or saying, show me what you've actually done. So for anyone looking to switch careers, I guess the upside is, you're not necessarily locked out just because you didn't start off in the right lane. But the catch is, you've got to show, somehow, some way, that you're flexible, ready to pick up new skills, and can roll with the changes. And if this is how things are moving, you can bet there's going to be even more wild changes ahead. That being said, this whole hustle culture thing has been everywhere lately. On social, in job interviews, even your dentist has a side gig now, so to speak. But where did all this start? I want to talk about Eric Baker's book, Make Your Own Job, How the Entrepreneurial Work Ethic Exhausted America, since that's kind of the blueprint for how we're going to unpack this thing. Baker's whole argument is that modern hustle culture is just the latest makeover for this much older American myth. The idea that, if you can't find a job, you just create one out of thin air, right? Classic bootstraps thinking. And it's crazy, because if you look back, especially post-1970s, there was this massive unraveling of traditional job security, pensions or unions. Suddenly, being self-employed or an entrepreneur became this badge of honor, or maybe like a life raft, since regular jobs just stopped offering people any real safety net. It's like, oh, you lost your union gig? Well, just become a consultant, right? Figure it out. Don't look back. Now let's pivot to the world of self-help and career guides. You know the shelves I'm talking about. Crush Your Goals, or 10 Steps to Unstoppable Success. But the big idea swirling around these books is always about grit, motivation, waking up at 5 in the morning, doing the hard work, and magical thinking. The implication is, if you're struggling, it's kind of your fault. Didn't hustle enough. Tony Robbins, all those dudes, they hammer that message, right? Work harder, think positive, you'll win. But here's the rub, and you see it in every one of these bestsellers, from the classic Who Moved My Cheese to today's Instagram influencers. There's never any talk about like, oh, your company scrapped your health coverage, or your boss squeezes every extra hour just 'cause they can. Nah, that stuff's just excuses. So is it any surprise we start blame shifting onto ourselves? I mean, we all admit it, we've done it, asking why we can't just get it together, instead of realizing maybe the entire system is geared against us and most working folks. That's a heavy thing to unpack, and not great for your mental health or for any sense of solidarity with people going through the same stuff. If everyone thinks their failure is personal, who's going to stand up together? But we're seeing pushback now. Let's talk about how workers are fighting back against this mindset. I mean, you've all seen the stories. Amazon warehouse workers standing up to insane quotas. Again, Starbucks baristas forming unions, even though everyone told them just grind harder, be your own boss someday. That's not the end game anymore. It's about demanding better work, not just any work. And I gotta say, there's this energy in the labor movement now that feels totally different from what I remember. Think about the phrase, self-reliance is not power. Simple, but it gets at the heart of it. Folks were talking about what it means to actually have a say at work, not just hustling alone, but coming together. And that gave me some hope, you know? That maybe, just maybe, we're moving beyond just telling people to fix themselves and instead building real force to change the whole rotten fucking deal. So when you step back and look at everything we covered today, From imperialism and sanctions, to democratic socialists trying to force open political space in New York, to baristas risking their livelihoods to demand dignity, to white-collar workers being told to hustle harder in a rigged job market, it all points to the same truth. The system keeps asking working people to absorb the shock. Work more, adapt faster, blame yourself, stay quiet. Meanwhile, the wealth, the power, and the decision-making stay firmly at the top. What labor keeps reminding us, over and over again, is that none of this is inevitable. War, sanctions, austerity, union busting, hustle culture, they're all choices. And if they're choices, they can be challenged. Sometimes that challenge looks like dock workers refusing to load weapons. Sometimes it's a small block of legislators trying to tax the rich. Sometimes it's a barista saying no more and walking a picket line. And sometimes it's just rejecting the lie that if you're struggling, it's a personal failure. Self-reliance isn't power. Collective action is. Solidarity is. A voice on the job and beyond the job is still a mighty voice indeed. So keep paying attention. Keep asking uncomfortable questions. Support workers who are fighting back, especially when they ask for boycotts and solidarity. And remember, nothing about this economy, these politics, or this culture changes unless working people force them to. Well, that does it for this episode. If you like what you hear, give a rate or review on your favorite podcast app to help me grow. I'm proud to be part of the Labor Radio Podcast Network, with over 200 labor shows you can check out at laborradionetwork.org. This has been the Labor Force Podcast. I'm Mike Strukin. Solidarity, always.